And now we are about to go into our interview session with Tanya Jovanovski, the Director of Roshan's Auctions, and our topic, as I mentioned, which is how to make money in property by buying properties on auction. So we have Tanya on the lines with us. Tanya, do you want to say hello to the listeners?
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be on South Coast Radio with Mr. Moodley in the house. And I'm going to be telling you all how to make money in property. And we're all going to be multi-millionaires by the end of the show. So there we go. Good morning to everyone.
Awesome stuff, Tanya. So just to give you guys a brief bio about Tanya. So she was born on the sunny shores of Spain, and she left Spain at the age of 2 years old and came to South Africa. She really loves it here. She's into property auctions for 30 years, owns 12 franchises called Roshan's Auction National. She's also the director. She's also a motivational speaker and also has written 10 books. She's also won numerous awards in business accolades as well. And so that being a brief bio about Tanya, going into our interview session this moment, some general questions for you, Tanya. So what initially drew you to the idea of buying properties at auction for investment purposes?
The options are that you could buy private treaty, which means you go and put in an offer and it gets reviewed by the seller. But the difference with auctions is we would sign a sole and exclusive mandate with the seller, and then on auction day it's very exciting as there's live bidding, and the highest bidder, gets the property, provided that the reserve has been met, and it's very hot. I've got triple ADD, so it suits me, and I was hoping to share this morning with your listeners the advantages of buying on auction and what they need to be careful of when buying on auction, just to make sure that when they spend their money that they have bought wisely.
That's great stuff, Tanya. So how does buying at auction differ from traditional property investment strategies?
Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. The Rawson Property Group, we have Rawson Auctions, as you mentioned. Our next auction is on the 28th of February. So we currently have 100 properties that are live on our online bidding site, online property auctions, as well as on the Rawson Property Group website. And if your clients wanted to buy those properties, what they would need to do is go and get a bid pack, contact the agent who is representing the property, go and view the property, and they would then have to register just before the auction. They'd need to send us their ID and their FICA documents. And what would happen is, let's say, for example, 10 of your listeners were wanting to buy an apartment for R1 million, we would have them registered. The differences is that if they are the highest bidder, they've got to pay Rawson Auctions a 10% commission over and above the bid amount. So let's say, for example, we've got a property going at R1 million. I would go 850, 900. We have 900, 950, and R1 million, and I'd bang down that hammer, boom, and the property would be sold. Now, that means your client is paying, or our buyer is paying R1 million plus 115,000 over and above. So before purchasing the property, the buyer really needs to do their homework. They need to do their calculations. And I'm going to give you a tip. And if there are astute people out there wanting to start building up a property portfolio, you must remember this, that your expenses must be lower than your profit. And the expenses that you have is, obviously you're going to be paying interest on a loan if you're taking out a bond. You're going to be paying rates and levies on the property. And if you're buying it as an investment, you're going to be getting rental income. So let's say, for example, this property, let's just say that the reserve was 900,000 and you bought it with commission for R1 million. And let's say your rates and levies were about 2,000 Rand, but let's say you were getting a rent of 15,000. Now, if you buy a property for R1 million, you're going to be paying roughly just over 10,000 a month back to the bank. So your expenses are going to be 10,000 plus your rates and levies. So your expenses in total will be 12. And if you're getting a rental income of 15,000, what does that mean? You're making more income than what you're expending. But
Wow.
you know what, Mr. Moodley? The secret is that you've got to practice this recipe, and you've got to buy unemotionally. It's like me. I'm a terrible chef. I can't cook. If you gave me a recipe for a chocolate cake, it would be disastrous. It would probably be burnt or raw. But if I practiced that chocolate cake recipe, I'd get it right. And it's exactly the same with property.
Exactly.
So you have to, as a new buyer especially, have a look at what's selling in the area. Don't just go and buy the first property you see. If, for example, this apartment that we were talking about was $1 million, go and Google, let's say, the apartments in the Berea and Durban. Apartments, 1 million Berea, and see what comes up, and see what quality of stock comes up, and see what other prices come up. And ask your property consultant, this is another tip, to do a CMA for you, and that's a comparative market analysis, which will show you the last 20 sales in close proximity to the actual one that you're buying. Now, this all needs to be done on auction day. So on auction day, you never know if you're going to have 20 other bidders bidding against you, or if you'll be the only bidder and maybe get a really good deal. But irrespective, if you have competitive bidding or not, don't go over your boundary. If your boundary, let's say, for example, there's a block of flats and 10 units have all been sold at $1 million. You want to buy that on auction at about 850, 900,000. So the mistake you mustn't do is get all wound up in the auction and the bidding and overbid. Because you must say to myself, I'm not going to bid a cent more than 900,000. And if the auctioneer goes above, just say I'm out. And there are lots of properties available, and then go and find a property where your expenses are lower than your profit.
Great stuff, Tanya. So, another question I have at this moment: what are some common misconceptions people have about buying property at auction?
Okay, so a lot of people think that properties on auction are repossessed stock and sort of sheriff's auction, and they're going to get the property at a huff. But today, auctions are one of the most exciting and interesting ways of buying property, and they are not all repossessed properties. Yes, sometimes you might find a bargain, but it's just an alternative way of buying property. In Australia, I go to Australia regularly. All properties, or not all, but I'd say 98% of properties are sold by auction. The advantages of an auction is the fact that your seller is a serious seller. There is a reserve price, and legally, if Mr. Moodley, let's say, for example, you gave us your home and you said, right, I want 5 million, you and I would sign a sole and exclusive mandate, which legally I cannot sell your property less than 5 million. So on auction, if I've got 5 million, then it's sold. You have to sell it. But if I've got 4.5 million, I would come back to you and say, Mr. Moodley, I'm so sorry I didn't achieve your reserve. Would you instruct me to re-auction in our March auction, or are you going to counter offer, or will you accept this offer? So basically, there is a reserve, and if the reserve is met, the property is considered sold. So I find auctions highly exciting, especially for sellers, because you've got your set price, you've got competitive bidding, you're not just dealing with one offer at a time. There's no advertising cost if somebody wants to sell on auction, and there's no auction fee. So, and we also, as an auction house, our job is to make sure that we can get as many buyers interested in the property as possible. So we do allow other agents to bring us clients, and then we at the end of the day want to get a fair price to both buyer and seller. But my belief, I bought property, as an example, I bought a plot in Stenberg Golf Estate about 25 years ago, which was 500,000, built a home on it, and that property is now worth 10 million because it's gained the increase in property prices. There's been capital growth in that property. So not only can you buy a property as an investment, you can also buy a property and let it sit, especially if you buy off plan. When you see a big board outside a property that it says development about to happen, that's good. Buy properties like that, because you first of all don't pay transfer costs when you're buying off plan, and there are lots of tips when buying property. But that you learn, the more time you spend in the property arena, the cleverer you get.
That's great stuff, Tanya. So you spoke about researching on properties earlier as well. So what resources do you recommend for researching auction properties and their value?
Okay, so let's say, for example, you wanted to buy in Mshlanga and you wanted to buy a house. Go on to Property 24, go on to private property, just Google the word houses for sale in Mshlanga, and that you will have a whole lot of options. Then physically go and view the property, and you'll probably find that in close proximity to the property that you and your family are keen on, or you want to buy as investment, you'll see a lot of other estate agent boards. Phone those agents up and just say, would you mind sharing with me what this property price is going for? So let's say, for example, it's number 1 Brown Road, and you like a house and it's 5 million, bearing in mind you're going to pay 10% commission over and above. So let's just make that 5.5, and it's number 7 that you're buying, and you see that number 3 in Brown Road is for sale. Call that agent up and say, what is your house selling for? And if it's between the 5 and 6 million mark, that's great. But if he tells you that property is selling for 2 million, you need to be a little bit worried buying a 5 million rand property in a 2 million rand area average.
Yeah.
So unless they've got gold caps and jacuzzis in every room and they've made it a triple-story house with 20 garages, you need to make sure that the house that you're buying, that previous owner hasn't overcapitalized, because what's going to happen is when you want to sell that house, you're going to battle because it's higher than the area average. Much better if you are buying below area average, which means you'll be able to on-sell it, and your recipe for your income and expenses will look pretty good.
Great stuff, Tanya. So what due diligence is crucial before bidding on a property at auction?
Okay, what I would recommend is the seller has to do compliance, which is your electrical, your beetle, your plumbing, etc. But there are companies out there. If you Google due diligence, or you can get hold of a builder or somebody who's knowledgeable when it comes to properties, or you get inspectors that can go out. A friend of mine did an inspection on a flat the other day that they were going to buy. It cost her 1,500 rand, and he picked up that there were problems with the geysers. There was problem with the one tap in one of the bathrooms. So they made sure that all of that was done, and it was put on the offer to purchase that all the compliances, namely the geysers, the tap, etc., would be fixed on transfer. So I would suggest definitely get a professional person in that, an inspector, to go in, pay that 1,000 or 2,000 rand, and make sure that they've got an eye to pick up those snags, so that you are buying something that is bulletproof.
Great stuff, Tanya. And so, how important is understanding the specific auction house's rules and procedures?
Very important. When we send a bid pack out, and that's, let's say, for example, we had that property in number 1 Brown Road. If you were purchasing it, we would send you a bid pack, and in that bid pack, there would be photographs of the property, a defect list. You must always ask for the defect list to make sure that you are aware of all the snags. Properties on auction are sold footsteps as is. However, we legally have to give full disclosure of any patent defects. Now, a patent defect is something that you can see, like a crack in the pool or something like that. A latent defect is a hidden defect, like it might be summer and there are bad leaks in wintertime. We need to get that disclosure form from the seller and disclose it to the buyer. So when buying on auction, have a look at the bid pack, have a look at the defect list, inspect the house, get family and friends to come and have a look, especially people who have got a big property portfolio and they know what to look for. Go and chat to the neighbors, and if there's a tenant in, have a chat to the tenant, ask them what the noise levels are like, if they're happy there, if they picked up any problems, and just say to the seller, look, this is an investment, please let us know, are there any things that we need to be cautious of? Your estate agent, if they're an ethical estate agent, needs to also give you full disclosure, and visit the home a few times before you buy it. For example, I mentioned our next auction date is on the 28th of February, which means you've got a few weeks to go and view the properties that are for sale.
Great stuff, Tanya. So, What financial considerations should someone prioritize when preparing to buy at auction, like in terms of budget, financing, etc.?
Okay, so when somebody buys a property, we always say to them, are you a cash buyer or are you needing to get a bond? If they need a bond, what we also like to go to sleep at night knowing that when we sold the property to our client, let's say, for example, for R1 million, they're going to be paying 12,000 Rand back a month. Now, we use Rawson Finance and they will do a thorough check on the client. They'll ask them for 3 months bank statements. They'll ask them for 3 months salary. If they're married in community of property, they would get that documentation from both partners. And they then check to see what the expenses of the family are. And if, for example, they have enough money to cover all their monthly expenses as well as paying off the bond. Now, here's another big tip.
Okay.
Often, you have somebody who is renting an apartment and they're paying 15,000 Rand rent every month. And what they could do is they could have actually purchased that property and pay back a bond of 12,000 Rand a month. So instead of flushing that rental, which they'll never see again in their life, they're actually paying off the property. And I promise you, if you study the property market and have a look at the prices and do your comparative sales, your comparative rentals, you can pick up bargain properties. And over the years, with knowledge and a lot of studying, you will end up having a large property portfolio. So, so many people are paying rental and they could be using that to be paying off a bond and owning the home themselves.
That's really great, Tanya. So, some questions based on bidding strategy and negotiation. How do you develop a strategic bidding approach for different auction scenarios?
Okay, so what happens is, let's say that I've got an apartment of R1 million, I would have made sure that I've checked the pricing and that it is a good price. I will do an intro on the property and say we've got this beautiful apartment for R1 million. The average in the area is 1.1. It's a 2-bedroom. Your rental income is 12,000 Rand, and I will motivate the price of R1 million. I will then open the bidding. We've got an online bidding platform, and if somebody opens the bidding at 200,000, I'll say, I'm not auctioning off the garage, but somebody give me 900. Do we have 900? On R1 million property, I'd probably go up in increments of 50,000, and I explain the terms and conditions up front, and briefly the terms and conditions are that everybody's got to be registered. I've got to have the FICA documents. The highest bidder will pay Rawson Auctions 10% commission plus that after the auction. They need to then pay a 5% deposit to the nominated transferring attorney of the seller. So if they pay a 5% deposit on 1 million, there would be 950,000 left to pay on that property, and our terms and conditions allow 45 days in which to pay the balance. Those people that require a bond, they would have to have final bond approval from a reputable finance company. We use Rawson Auctions, and that final bond approval has to be in place on auction day, as we've got to, compare apples with apples. We can't have some cash buyers, some people buying on bond, and the bond approval's not in place. So if people register, we obviously ask for that documentation to make sure that the bidding is fair to all.
Awesome. So, how do you manage emotions and avoid overpaying in the heat of an auction?
So what happens is, if somebody is buying a property which is bonded and they need the bond, our finance department and the banks are not going to want to lend money to people who can't afford it. So the finance department protects you quite a bit. They're not going to give someone a bond if they see that their financial records and their bank statements don't warrant that payment. We also explain the terms and conditions thoroughly, and if somebody doesn't qualify for a R5 million house, for example, we say, look, we want you to be comfortable with this purchase. Maybe you'd better look at a property for 3 million. You've got the money, you've got the bond approval for 3, you've got the cash that you need extra, because with auctions, the deposit and the commission is non-refundable, and we certainly don't want somebody losing their commission and their deposit because they haven't done their own homework. I would also advise that If somebody who's a first-time home buyer, that they do go to their accountant and say, would you have a look at the offer to purchase? Would you have a look at the terms? Go to a friend or family mentor who's bought property and ask them to have a look at the figures, and ask quite a few people so that on auction day, you are very comfortable knowing what your payments are going to be and that you are able to pay the expenses that and the costs that will be called for.
Great, Tanya. That's really great. So, what are some red flags to watch out for during the bidding process?
So, the bidding process is very, very fast. So, as I said previously, if you want to buy the property and you see the area average is a million, stick to 900,000. And we also have a tobacco auction where it's going really quickly. It's quite easy to manage, but you get some people who are investment buyers and they buy properties without even looking at them. We do recommend that an inspection is done, that the terms and conditions are explained extremely well, and I think the red flags are that if they haven't inspected the property, they haven't had a look at the defect list, and they haven't done the sums, they could get into hot water. But people are paying for properties, and they're using it. It's not like they're buying a bottle of perfume or something like that. It's a big asset. So I do find that 98% of our clients do a thorough due diligence before they purchase the property.
So, Tanya, do you recommend using proxy bidding, and in what situations?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Do I?
Do you recommend using proxy biddings, and in what situations?
Yeah, absolutely. I do recommend it. Proxy bidding, are you saying that somebody bids on your behalf?
Right.
Okay. So if we have a lot of clients who buy a huge amount of property and they get somebody to bid on their behalf, but then from a FICA point of view, we would have to have thorough knowledge and make sure that the FICA was in place, that we are dealing with that client, and if they're bidding on behalf of somebody else, they would have to fill out a form confirming that they had consent, because I had a property in Lindudno once for 10 million, and somebody had a proxy to bid on somebody else's behalf, and the person is obviously, we have to contact them before to say that to confirm Mr. X is bidding on your behalf. We've got the proxy form, we've got your ID, can you confirm that? So we make sure that we have all the paperwork and authorization in place beforehand. We also ask them for the name of the attorney, and we verify them with the attorney as well.
Yeah. Awesome stuff, Tanya. And so some questions that I have based on post-auction and profitability. What are the typical next steps after winning a property at auction?
Okay, so let's say, for example, you'd bid on an apartment and I said, congratulations, Mr. Moodley, the property is yours. Straight after the auction, you would sign a offer to purchase, a Rawson offer to purchase. That would then be sent to the seller to say, congratulations, your property has been sold. Mr. Moodley is the new buyer. We would call for our commission. The transferring attorney would then arrange all the compliance. So there's about 20 boxes that need to be ticked before the property can transfer. We'd get your FICA, the buyer's FICA. We'd take all of that documentation, send it to the transferring attorney. If you were bonding that specific property, the bond attorney would also be incorporated with all the paperwork. They would submit the final bond approval, and then it goes through the transfer process. The transfer process is about 2.5 to 3 months. There's certain documentation that is required from both buyer and seller. And for example, if the compliance is done and dusted, it's quite quick. If all the FICA's in place, it's quite quick. But if we have a situation where there's a tenant in the property, for example, and we can't get access to do the compliance, something like that could cause a delay. But generally speaking, there's about 3 months before the property is transferred from the old seller to the new buyer's name.
Great, Tanya. So can you share a specific example of a successful auction purchase and its outcome?
Yeah. So a little while ago, I had a commercial property in Retreat. There were 3 levels. The leases were on a month-to-month. The property was valued at 3 million rand. We had our top bidder who has a concept of subdividing office space to allow for smaller rooms where they use a common boardroom, a common reception, and he converted the 3 stories into smaller offices, rented them out, built up the income, and sold it 6 months later for 5 million.
Great, Tanya. So, what advice would you give to someone interested in starting their journey in buying a property at auction?
What advice I would give them is, if you want to become an expert, because you have to practice, is why don't you come and join me at Wilson Auctions? We've got 12 offices nationally. We've got a lovely office in Durban. We've got some satellite offices. Wow. And what I'm actually offering listeners this morning is a complimentary sponsored proficiency course, which is valued at 5,000 per person. But obviously, we would want somebody to join us either on a part-time or a full-time basis. So let's say Bobby decided he wanted to do this. What he would do is I would interview him with my HR department, and we would do online auction training with him. He would do the proficiency course, which we would sponsor at 5,000. So first 10 listeners who contact me by email, and my email is Tanya.auctions with an S at rawson.co.za. I will interview you. And if you qualify, we would then put you on training. You'd come and work for us. You'd earn lots of money in commission, but you would also gain a huge amount of knowledge. So it would be twofold, that you would be working, gaining experience, and then in that process, you would be introduced to so many properties, and you would spot the bargain buy and purchase them and build up your own property portfolio. So we're giving away 10 of those sponsorships to the successful applicants this morning. But if you don't have a pen and you're driving and listening to the South Coast radio show, then just go onto the Rawson website and click on auctions, and my details will be on there, and you can pop an email to me.
Wow, that's awesome stuff, Tanya. Thank you for that. We do appreciate that as well. And I do have a few bonus questions for you at this moment. So,
yes.
What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned through your experience with auction property investment?
Price, 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 and price. If you had to hypnotize me and ask me what the most valuable lesson in property is we as agents have to get the price in at area average, and the buyers must look at price. You must research your area. You get 2 categories of buyers in residential. They're homeowners who are buying it for themselves to live in, or their families, or investment buyers. And there's nothing worse than, for example, when you go into a shop and buy a top, and next week you see it on sale, and you think, oh my word, I've lost 40%. Now, the same applies to property, but you're obviously spending a lot more money. So, guys, do your homework, get your pricing right, get your snag list, research in the area, go to as many show houses as possible, and sit down and do the calculations. And ask your estate agent, if you choose to use another agency, just say, I'd like to buy this property. Can you send me an email? And I want the transferring attorney and the bond originator copied in the email to tell me, if I bought this property for $1 million, I want to know what my monthly expenses are. Also very important is get a copy of the body corporate rules and the body corporate expenses. Because, for example, you don't want to buy an apartment to find out that in 2 months' time they're putting a lift in and there's going to be a special levy. So phone the body corporate, send them an email, just say, I'm looking at buying a property, a unit in the block. Could you confirm if your financials are up to date, if there are going to be any big repairs to the apartment? Would there perhaps be a special levy that's going to pop in? So do as much homework as possible and say to your agent, look, I'm a first-time home buyer. Please, can you have a look at the financials with me? Can you put me in touch with the body corporate, etc., so that there's 100% clarity? You don't want any hidden costs popping up.
Yes.
And then another thing is if you are buying it and capital return, You need to find out if there's a demand for rentals in that area, because the last thing you want to do is to buy a property and it's vacant on occupation and you advertise and then nobody is there to rent. In Cape Town, where I'm based, there's a huge demand for rentals at the moment. So, of course, what happens when the lease expires, everybody's popping up, they're escalating the rentals because of the demand. So make sure buy in an area where there is a big demand for rentals if you're an investment buyer.
Great, Tanya, that's great stuff. Also, what tools or resources would you recommend for aspiring auction property investors?
Okay, so there are online tools. So you can go onto, let's say you went onto the Rawson website, you go www.Rawson Property Group, click on auctions. If there's a property that you like, click on that. So let's say the property you like is 1 Brown Road, and we always disclose what our reserve is. So if our reserve is $1 million, just under the photograph of the property, you'll see a little block which says calculator. And you click on that, put in your bid amount, and it'll give you a breakdown. So it's an app that breaks down the bond repayment, and then obviously on the bid pack it tells you what your rates and levies are, and then it'll calculate for you what your repayments are going to be, and it'll give you an estimate transfer costs as well. Or you can ask your agent to give you an email copying the attorney to give you all those costs. But there are lots of apps that bond calculators, etc., that can work out those costs for you.
Awesome, Tanya. And one last question I have for you this moment. What are your predictions for the future of the auction property market?
The auction, I started Rawson Auctions about 15 years ago when auctions were not that well known. But these days, nearly every property company is opening an auction division. It's fast, it's exciting. It's definitely a new way of getting into property. So I think auctions are going to boom. I think it's going to be exactly like it is in Australia. I think auctions are going to be the way to go when buying property. I also think property prices, recently I'm in Cape Town, as I mentioned, I've been away on the weekend, quite a few places, and Cape Town is buzzing with tourists. Wow. Cape Town at the moment is, all the restaurants are full, all the B&Bs are full, all the hotels are full, and one thing South Africa offers is a fabulous lifestyle. Our costs here, as an example, I have a home, as I mentioned, in Steenberg Golf Estate. The value is 10 million rand. If I sold that and bought in Australia, I'd get a tiny little apartment compared to living in a luxurious golf estate. I don't live there, I rent it out. But that is what South Africa offers. We have an incredible lifestyle. We've got so many beautiful spots here. So I think the overseas market is starting to see that South Africa is one of the most beautiful places to live. We can just work on our crime rate a little bit, getting that down. And, as the tourists come in, the job opportunities will increase, and I certainly think that South Africa is one of the most beautiful places in the world to live, and I do think property prices are going to escalate. One thing that the listeners must watch out for is also take into account that bond repayments, your interest fluctuates, so it's not always the same, so you need to sort of take in to account that it might increase. Obviously, if it decreases, it's in your favor. But I think the bond repayments, they've been going up and up. But I think in a few months, hopefully, they might come down again. But, you might as well look into a glass ball, nothing certain there. But I definitely highly recommend property is a very, very good investment, provided you've done your homework with the sums.
That's really awesome stuff, Tanya. We do really appreciate you being with us on South Coast Radio. Before we do close off this moment right now, we spoke earlier about you guys giving 10 listeners prizes worth at the value of 50,000 Rand. Could you explain that to the listeners once again as well?
Only with pleasure. Any of you who would like to join us in the property arena and become a intern agent, you're welcome to send me an email, tanya.auctions@rawson.co.za. If our self-post radio listeners are driving, just pop onto our Rawson website and the details will be on there. Pop me an email, and we are currently sponsoring 10 of the listeners this morning a complimentary proficiency course. It's a 2-week online course which will teach you so much about property. We also do online training once you join us. So your first 10 emails that I get from your listeners would be entitled to that proficiency course. Obviously, I've got to interview the applicants first to make sure that they are suitable candidates to work as property consultants, and if they are, they would be rewarded with that proficiency course.
Wow, that's awesome stuff, Tanya. It's really awesome. We do appreciate that as well. And also, thank you once again, Tanya, for being with us on South Coast Radio and talking about the specific topic that we spoke about with auctions and properties. It's really awesome stuff, I must say, Tanya. Thank you once again for being with us.
Wonderful. Only a pleasure. Thanks, Mr. Moodley. All the best. Wishing you a blessed day. Thanks a lot. Bye.
No problem. Thank you once again, Tanya. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That was our session with Tanya Jovanovski, which was based on our topic was how to make money in property by buying properties on auction. So that being our session for the moment. Thank you once again, guys, for joining us on South Coast Radio.
The radio station you can't live without. This is your radio.
This is South Coast Radio.